Me now to discuss that and much more are three of the nation's best political minds. Democratic strategist, CNN contributor Robert Zimmerman, New York Daily News columnist and host of the morning show on WWRL, also a CNN contributor, Errol Louis. And from opinionjournal.com, we're joined by James Freeman. And gentlemen, thanks very much. You know, we really should start with Israel. It's day 7. We keep seeing the pictures coming out of this area that are very, very disturbing. Robert, some thoughts on what's happening?
Obviously, the real tragedy here is that this conflict can come to an end when Hamas is prepared to stop perpetrating this violence on its own people in Gaza. If you look to the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority is able to find a means to coexist with the State of Israel. It's difficult, of course, but they are able to have a relationship and a dialogue. The problem here is that when Hamas refused to renew the ceasefire and began to pursue missile attacks on Israel, one after the other, into residential areas after innocent civilians, it became clear Israel had to respond. And as the foreign minister for Israel said, Foreign Minister Livni said, she made the point very clear that they are really on the front lines. This is not just about fighting for Israel's security. This is about the war on terrorism that all of us have a vested interest in winning. This is something that President-elect Obama will have to face in 3 weeks. Errol, your thoughts on how he needs to approach this?
Well, it is crystal clear that the parties to this conflict are not going to resolve this on their own. There has to be some kind of outside intervention or negotiation. The United Nations has been unable to do it. France just struck out. It's going to be the United States' turn at bat. It'll be up to Barack Obama to try and reinstitute some kind of active dialogue. And it's going to need to be regional. I mean, it's not as if Hamas is going to sit down with, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton or anybody else. They're going to have to involve the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians. They're going to have to make some kind of conversation begin. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot of bloodshed. There's going to be a lot of loss of life in the meantime. But the conversation has got to start, and it'll have to be near the top of President Obama's agenda. Yeah. Some have suggested that he needs to talk to Hamas. Is that a legitimate suggestion? James, what do you think?
Well, I guess the problem is that the U.S. has been recognizing them as the government there after they won an election. But I think, including Barack Obama, people acknowledge if someone is firing missiles into your neighborhood, you should respond. I think it's disappointing this week that airstrikes haven't gotten rid of the missile attacks. And if that report you just had on the polling that only 19% of Israelis want a ground invasion, that suggests a lot of pressure on the regime to find those rockets very quickly and take them out.
Yeah. It's also important to remember that Hamas, while they won a legislative election, did not win control of the government. They basically overthrew the standing government there. And the option of negotiating with terrorists like Hamas is just not an acceptable policy. They have to be held accountable by their own people in order to bring this violence to an end.
And I think what Mr. Obama needs to look at is who funds them. And that gets back to Iran. It gets back to Syria as well. So I think looking at how you exert leverage on Iran to cut off that funding is got to be a key part of this.
Well, no doubt it is one of the worst problems to walk into in your first week as president. Let's look at, we have some interesting polls on Obama and other presidents. And 76% of Americans say that Obama is a strong and decisive leader. And that's interesting. That percentage is higher than the percentage that Obama got on election night. So people are gaining, confidence in him. What does that suggest to you, Robert?
It's such an important poll. And I know people tend to look at this as just the goodwill for an incoming president. It's so much greater than that because the number is an extraordinary mandate. In the election, we saw a bipartisan mandate for change. This is a bipartisan national mandate for solutions. And the American people, while it's going to be a long process, are expecting their Congress to work in a bipartisan fashion for solutions. They're expecting their business leadership to step up for solutions. Solution-based approaches are going to be the key words to look for.
We have another poll, which I find fascinating, that Obama has a approval rating that actually exceeds President Bush's approval rating after 9/11. That's Obama now is 76%, and Bush after 9/11 was 75%. That's a strong approval rating, Errol.
Yeah, it points to a no excuses, I think, approach. They're going to have the wind at their back. They have as much of a mandate as they could have asked for. More, in fact, than they probably really won on Election Day. So they're going to have to use their political capital wisely. The problem, of course, is that there are all these new things that are popping up on the agenda. I mean, he thought all he had to do was fix the worst economic catastrophe of the last 50 years. Well, now it turns out there's an international crisis brewing. And there's also going to be a number of different ways he's going to have to split up that political capital.
Well, I think a big part of that popularity rising since his election is he seems to be open-minded. You talk about bipartisan solutions. He understands we've got a rough economy now. He's saying we're not going to raise taxes immediately. We think that would be a disaster. Hopefully he pushes that further and further into the future and ultimately never. But as you reported, he also may not impose new trade restrictions. He may leave NAFTA alone. These are all very good signs, and it's signs that he recognizes in a tough economy. You don't want to put up trade restrictions. You don't want to raise taxes.
I think the worry, though, I'm sorry, Robert, but the worry is that his approval rating is so high that there'll be a little bit of natural fall off on approval as these very, very difficult problems start to consume him.
Look, managing expectations is going to be very critical. The good news is on the international front, you see the nations around the world wanting to build diplomatic relations with the United States and use the U.S. as a diplomatic a vehicle. So I think that's a good sign. Domestically, we have to be very realistic. But I think one of the most important things we can do that's really quite critical is to make sure that we do, in fact, reform NAFTA and do stand up to CAFTA. And I'm very impressed by the number of people in the Obama administration, like the Secretary of Labor, for example, and the Secretary of State designee, who have made it clear that we have to find reforms, both environmental and labor reforms, in these so-called free trade agreements.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think there's a recognition that we don't want to replay the 1930s. And I think, again, that is why he has got a very high approval rating now, is people see that he's not locked into positions. He ran as the man who was going to cut taxes for 95% of Americans. I think people responded to that, and they're responding to this idea that he's not turning left on economic policy.
Well, you know, the wild card in all of this, the wild card is that he's got this database of 2 million contributors. He's stirred up all of this, not just approval, but people who expect to be put to work, who expect to be able to be involved, to not just watch the government, to be a part of it. And how he gets people involved and keeps that level of goodwill, I think, is going to be the real determinant of where his popularity standings go.
Gentlemen, we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back to it. We'll be back with our panel in a moment. And coming up, 25 new movies are the latest additions to the Library of Congress. We're going to tell you which movies are now a permanent part of American history. So stay with us for that. We're back now with our panel, Robert Zimmerman, Errol Louis, and James Freeman. Let's go to the Blagojevich never-ending saga. And it's really, I mean, this week we've had many, many developments. What I'd first like to do is play for you a comment that Roland Burris made. He's fiercely fighting for his Senate appointment. Let's listen to that for a moment.
We're certainly going to make contacts with the leadership of the Senate to let them know that the governor of Illinois has made a legal appointment and that I am currently the junior senator for the state of Illinois. And we're hoping and praying that, you know, they will see the reason in his appointing me as a very qualified, capable, able, and ready to serve individual.
Senate Democrats not of that mind, are they?
Oh, in fact, the Secretary of State of Illinois is not of that mind as well. I think Mr. Burris is going to find out over time that his distinguished public service reputation, his distinguished career in public service, is far more important than obtaining a Senate seat. Because if you look at the politics of what we're facing here, this is really an issue of running the clock. Obviously, the Secretary of State wants to delay certifying his appointment till the impeachment of its process is complete in Illinois. The United States Senate has made it clear, because this process is tainted, clearly scandalized by the Tony Soprano of governors, the governor of Illinois. As a result of that, they're going to also delay approving him. And this is not about race, and I really resent this being made about race. This is about a scandalous governor, and I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Burris is allowing himself to be used as a pawn in this really ultimate plea bargaining effort by the governor of Illinois to save himself.
We've seen this race discussion turn up in recent days. Errol, thoughts on this?
Well, look, I think it is about race to the extent that it's about politics. You know, I mean, what you just described is not a legal process, but a political process of delay and delay. I mean, I think he has every legal right, the governor, until and unless he's impeached or even indicted. He hasn't been indicted. He has every legal right to make an appointment, which he has. Now, to the extent that they politically want to jam him up and delay and stop Roland Burris from taking that Senate seat, Well, he's going to respond. And his response, among other things, is to point out to Dick Durbin, the senior senator from Illinois, Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, that, you know what, you've got black constituents. You know what? You've got some people that you've got to think about who may not be all that thrilled about the fact that you're keeping me from taking a seat to which I am legally entitled. I mean, I think that's perfectly legitimate as an argument.
Oh, well, I think it's interesting seeing the judicial activism of the 60s hurt Democrats. The Constitution seems pretty clear that the Senate makes this call, but thanks to a decision from 1969, I believe, he seems to have an argument. So.
This we'll be discussing next week also. Gentlemen, thank you for being with me. Robert Zimmerman, Errol Louis, and James Freeman. Still ahead, we'll tell you if any of your favorite movie lines are now written into this country's history books. Stay with us for that. We'll be right back.